Good afternoon. My name is Will Payne, and I'm the Performance and Budget Manager for the City of Largo. Today, we're going to talk more about the Largo Municipal Golf Course Planning Project. We're going to do a financial overview and hopefully answer some frequently asked questions that have come up during the course of our community input and community engagement. In the course of this presentation, we're going to go over some background as it relates to the golf course and the golf course's financial history. More importantly, we'll talk about the present and future projections and how we're planning ahead for that future. We'll also go over next steps as they relate to this project and how you can continue to be involved and receive information about this project. So why are we talking about this now? We know that within the next 5 to 10 years, the golf course may require some significant capital investments. We take very seriously the importance of long-range financial planning so that these decisions can be made in an intentional, proactive, and well-thought-out way. There's not a near-term issue. Current funding for the golf course is sufficient for its day-to-day and near-term operations, and it can fund the minor capital and repair and maintenance things that come up. But we know future maintenance and large-scale capital investments, things like greens reconstruction or updates to infrastructure like the parking lot or the clubhouse, those currently couldn't be handled by the golf course fund. So we want to make sure we're talking now about what the future looks like and what we need to do to be prepared. So some background information on this project. The process started in the spring of 2020 to help inform our future decision making. When we talk about the future, we're talking about a 5 to 10 year time horizon, not next year or the year after, but we're looking at 5 to 10 years out. We're working with an external consultant, the Urban Land Institute, who's put together a technical assistance panel. And those folks are going to review community input and provide recommendations to the City Commission at a public meeting in March 2021. We've conducted community input and engagement through surveys, stakeholder conversations, and other avenues. And you can see additional videos and information about that at largo.com/golf updates. Today, we're going to go over finances, including past, present, and our future projections, and hopefully provide some of those answers to frequently asked questions that came up in those engagement sessions. Some of those questions included things like, why is future maintenance of the golf course not funded? Or is the golf course currently running a financial deficit? And what have been the efforts by the city up to this point to manage those finances? And we're going to answer those today. So the city golf course operates like a business. It operates as what we call an enterprise fund, which means that all of the revenue the golf course generates comes from people who use the golf course, whether that's eating at the cafe, buying something at the pro shop, or paying for rounds of golf. It generates the money it needs for its operations. And right now, those revenues and the money that's generated from its business is enough to pay for, like we said, minor capital costs and the normal day-to-day operations of the golf course. However, what it's not sufficient to cover is what may come up in the future, those major renovation or reconstruction needs, whether it's greens or the parking lot or the clubhouse. We know right now that the revenue isn't putting enough away to save for those future needs. We don't have any of those major capital costs planned for in the current capital improvement program, which is our 5-year plan for major investments. But we also don't have the golf course fund projected to become profitable in that time horizon, which means other revenue would be needed if we're going to pay for those major capital costs in that 5 to 10 year time horizon. So an overview of some of our investments in the golf course from the time we purchased it. We bought the golf course in 1979. That included the land, buildings, equipment, everything that went along with it. During the 1980s, you can see we did some renovations on things like irrigation and greens and cart paths. And then in the mid-90s, we did some more major renovations, reconfiguring holes and renovating the clubhouse. In the mid-2000s, the course underwent another round of significant renovations, and that included greens, tees, cart paths, irrigation, drainage to the tune of about $2 million. But it's important to note that those renovations, those largest component of renovations were funded with penny for Pinellas money, or also called the local option sales tax. So those major capital investments were not funded through funds generated by the golf course. As we look at the financial history, you can see some relationship there. So after we bought the golf course throughout the 1980s, it was mostly profitable with a small net loss one year. And the general fund did contribute some money to the golf course in those early years. In the late 80s through the mid 90s, the golf course was doing very well. It reported net income every year, so it was generating a profit, the highest year of which was fiscal year 1992, when it generated $266,000 in net income. But as we move further along into the 2000s, the trajectory changed and it reported net losses every year except for one. And the general fund did contribute to some money to needs during that time period. And like we talked about, the local option sales tax, or penny for Pinellas fund, contributed the over $2 million for some of those major capital needs that arose during that time. Looking at this chart here, this is just a visualization of the last 20 years of revenues and expenses. And what's just important to note is you can see that the orange bar, the revenue, doesn't exceed the blue bar, which is expenses, in most years. So over the last 20 years, that trajectory has maintained where revenues are not outpacing expenditures when they include depreciation, which is putting aside that money for future capital investments. So during this time, what have we been doing to try and improve our revenue streams and manage costs for the golf course? Well, the team at the city and those managing the golf course are constantly coming up with innovative ways to generate new revenue, to manage costs, and to manage the golf course in a way that puts it on its most stable financial footing. The city invests in regular maintenance to extend the life of assets so that we get the most life and use out of them as possible. From a programming standpoint, the golf course is constantly finding ways to reach new customers and generate new revenue through things like new leagues and youth activities, bringing foot golf to the golf course, tournaments and sponsored events. They've changed how they market and have introduced text messaging and social media marketing, adding tools like online tee time registration to make it easier for people to come play golf, added customer loyalty programs and other promotions. So doing a lot to try and reach new people and generate new business. We've made sure to replace equipment when that was a smarter use of money to reduce maintenance costs on that equipment. And with our operations, the city and the golf course have done things such as creating a rental venue to increase revenue and community use of the space, bringing the snack shop management in-house to try and improve service and reduce costs associated with it. Now, as we look at some more of these graphs, these are just visuals to show you what the future financial projections for the golf course look like. So these are our current year projections looking out 5 years. As you can see, that green line is the expenditures, the blue line is the revenues, and the red line is our fund balance or reserves. So you can see that for this 5-year time horizon, we expect our expenditures to outpace our revenues each year. And that red line, the fund balance or reserves, keeps going down each year till it hits that zero mark between FY24 and 2025. Now, what we'll look at next is just what this looks like if things shift up or down a little bit. So if revenue increased 3% annually, whether that was through more rounds of golf played or increasing the cost of certain things, but if we generated 3% increase in revenue, you can see that that red line, the reserves, doesn't hit that bottom of zero in the 5-year timeline. But we can see the trajectory is still similar. The expenditures are outpacing revenues, and it just pushes the point where that fund balance reaches zero to a later year. But we still know that that's the trajectory that it's on. And these things do change from year to year. So in that previous slide, we know that while this is a 5-year projection, we can't predict the future. So we do watch this every year, but we want to make sure we're planning for the future in case that time comes when we need to evaluate how to manage those revenues and expenditures because we can't let that fund balance get to zero. If those revenues decrease 3% annually, you can see that red line hits the zero mark a little bit earlier. So it just pushes forward that conversation of how do we manage revenues and expenditures for the golf course after that point. The big point here is that we just want to be planning for the future and having these conversations early, knowing that the environment around us changes. We can't plan for external factors, whether it's weather or the public's interest in golf, but we will do everything we can to try and keep this stable and sustainable. But we want to make sure for all of these different scenarios that we're looking out into the future and planning for what may come ahead. So we know that those renovations that we did in the mid-2000s are expected to last 20 years. So that's 2027. So it's outside of that 5-year time horizon, but in that 5 to 10-year window that we talked about. And those are things like those greens reconfiguration and greens renovations and cart paths and things like that. And some of these future renovation costs may be less than what they were in the past. And we practice things like effective greens management to focus on preserving the course and postponing the need for major renovations until they're really truly needed. But we also want to focus those future renovations on preserving our asset, this asset that is the golf course, and making sure it remains competitive out there and that it's a place that people want to come and continue to play golf. So we've got to base these future investment decisions on all of these things, including things beyond our control, like changes in the golfing industry and demand. And those are things that the consultants from the Urban Land Institute are going to talk about a little bit more in the work session as well. So as we said, we've conducted some community outreach, and those takeaways are available for you at largo.com/golf updates. But we received feedback from the public surrounding the golf course, from nonprofit and business stakeholders, from golf course customers, people who use the golf course, through surveys and stakeholder conversations. The next steps with all of this are that the Urban Lands Institute will host their technical assistance panel in March 2021, where they'll provide recommendations to the City Commission during a work session. That work session will be March 9th, 2021 at 4 p.m. And they'll review the community input and make some of their recommendations based on all of this feedback, some industry analysis, land use considerations, and other things. But it's important to note that this is a long-term planning process, and this work session and this technical assistance panel is not going to be where we make any final decisions in regards to land use or the golf course. This March 9th meeting is just going to be a step in this discussion where they provide some recommendations and some feedback based on this process thus far. So again, this public meeting is going to be the work session on March 9th, a Tuesday. It is open to the public for live viewing, and public comment will be available. You can always watch online at largo.com/live-tv and submit your feedback via email at connect@largo.com, or ask any questions at connect@largo.com as well. And if you have more questions and comments, again, please visit largo.com/golf updates. You can sign up for email updates. You can view frequently asked questions and project updates, and you can find contact information for other questions or comments. Again, that connect@largo.com email address, or there's a phone number you can call, 727-587-6740, extension 7630. And we look forward to you continuing to engage and participate with us as we continue on this journey. So thank you very much.